Hey, everybody, it is Trags. One more week, episode 15 of Jungle Roar, a Cincy football podcast. This week, I welcome back Charlie Goldsmith of the Cincinnati Enquirer, doing a great job along with Kelsey Conway, covering the Bengals. Follow Charlie on Twitter at CharlieG_. How you doing, Charlie?
I'm doing well, thanks. And I get asked a lot about the Twitter handle, so I'll explain it here.
Please.
CharlieG_ was obviously taken. And my name, Charlie Goldsmith, is too long to fit as a Twitter handle. It's too many letters. So you kind of had to pick which part of the name I wanted to put in there. And I came up with what I thought was a happy medium. I understand it's not easy, but you do the best you can.
So Charlie G is very easy to remember. And the __ is kind of a pain in the ass. But had Charlie_G been taken?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So
okay.
There's a famous Charlie Goldsmith,
right?
And he has a lot of him and his brand have a lot of the combinations of the words Charlie and Goldsmith tied together, taken up. So I really had to get creative. Even a lot of the numbers were taken. I would have had to have gone to some pretty obscure numbers if I wanted to go that route. So again, the __ seemed to be the smoothest way to go. You can't spell it wrong. So I guess that was the thought process.
Charlie G __ again. Be sure to follow Charlie on Twitter, and that'll do it for this week of Jungle Roar. That's a joke. These are pretty heady times, Charlie, for the Bengals. They're 5-2, coming off that incredible 41-17 win in Baltimore. They certainly look legit. Charlie, can they act legit? Can they handle success?
There couldn't have been a better recipe to show what the Bengals were capable of this season than exactly the test they faced in Baltimore. The team, the quality that they had, the reputation they had, and then individually on offense, on defense, how much Lamar specifically and how much Don Martindale's blitz-specific game plan had challenged the Bengals before. You put that all together, and it would have been one of the hardest games you could possibly draw up to pick the Bengals to win.
Yes.
And then to win the game 41-17, again, because of those factors that I mentioned, like it's about as impressive as a win as you could have possibly even drawn up for the Bengals. And the fact that they did it so decisively and in a way that I think it was their most repeatable game, and we can talk about that more. Like there was nothing really that fluky about it.
Yes.
Until the late
Great point.
Runs.
Correct.
No takeaways. It wasn't a game where Baltimore was heavily penalized. No deep balls really to chase. There wasn't a 70-yard play, which is hard to sustain. All of that piece together gives that win even more credibility.
There was, of course, the 82-yard catch and run, but that's to your point. Yeah, but to your point, that was not an 82-yard bomb. That was exactly. 4 missed tackles, which was shocking to watch. Wink Martindale's defense just kind of disintegrate there in the second half, and we'll get to the offense in a little bit, but I want to get, Charlie, to your terrific story. You wrote right after the game, and I was in the press room with you as you were asking about the linebackers, the combination of using 2 and 3 linebackers and swapping them back and forth. I thought that was interesting because I tweeted during the game, at least in the first half, I wasn't a big fan of having 3 linebackers on the field at one time against Lamar, just because I didn't think there was enough speed on the field, but I was proven wrong. I thought as the game went on, it wasn't just Logan Wilson playing very well, doing his typically good job bringing ball carriers down to the turf, but it was also Akeem Davis-Gaither playing well and Jermaine Pratt playing well. I think they got tremendous, maybe arguably their best game out of the linebacking core on Sunday.
I think it was the best game plan they've had with Lou Anarumo. Like, do you know how gutsy it's got to be to enter the game with statistically one of the defense that's in the top 5 to 10 in most of those major categories? And then to say for the game against the Ravens, you're going to scrap all that and try something completely different. And then for that strategy to work as well as it did, better than it ever had in any game the Bengals had played against Lamar Jackson. It's a testament to a well-prepared and intelligent group of players that were ready to take on that challenge. And the other testament, I think, too, is like how much they mixed it up on third downs. They were the defense that was really, I guess you could say, imposing their style of play and
Right.
keeping the Ravens on their back foot, just because how many changes they made on third down. It was stuff I'd never seen the Bengals do before, and it worked right away. It immediately clicked, which is something that's really hard to execute in the NFL.
Well, what's interesting about what you bring up, Charlie, is having covered Belichick in New England for, quarter of a century, he was a game plan head coach, meaning, and he was that way back with the Browns in the early 90s. He was that way, of course, as a defensive coordinator with those historic Giant teams in the 80s and the 1990 Super Bowl champion Giants. He would always throw out everything and come up with a new game plan for the game coming up, especially against a unique offense that they were facing. For instance, everybody remembers and knows, I think, that Belichick's game plan for Super Bowl 25 against the Bills, the Red Gun offense, is in the Hall of Fame. That game plan is in the Hall of Fame in Canton. And it's because Belichick threw everything out and said, we're going to try something new. We're going to go with more. We're going to go with only 2 down linemen, and we're going to try and confuse the Bills and dare them to run the ball. And they didn't. And I thought that was kind of, what Lou Anarumo did on Sunday is he kind of dared the Ravens to do something in terms of letting Lamar run with the ball all the time. And it worked. I mean, yes, Lamar had 88 yards. He's the 6th leading rusher in the National Football League this year. But what he didn't want was Lamar running out of the pocket, no pressure on him, and throwing the ball downfield.
So, like, what we had seen so much with Lou Anarumo is him, like, his big changes had always been in the secondary. He'd change up, like, different zone principles from the safeties. He'd change up different coverage schemes and what the cornerbacks were doing. Like, I especially remember the Eagles game last season as a game where, like, the secondary was just doing completely different stuff. And that didn't work as well last season as very little did for the Bengals defense in 2019 and 2020, one of the worst statistical units in the NFL. But what made it so different against the Ravens was how much changed up front with the way, like, just in the first 5 yards at the line of scrimmage, the way the defensive linemen and the linebackers were, I guess, what they were asked to do and the way they were executing their responsibilities. It was completely different from blitzes coming in different places, from shifts at the line of scrimmage to Trey Hendrickson. Like, on one of the biggest plays of the game, they sacked Lamar Jackson on 3rd down to take him out of field goal range, forced him to punt from the 40, no field goal, right in the 3rd quarter.
I thought that was the single biggest play of the game, by the way. I kept tapping James Rapine on the shoulder. I was like, if they win this game, remember that sack.
And so what I remember about that, I'm pretty sure I have this right, Trey Hendrickson lined up on the right side, and he went up against the right tackle. Trey Hendrickson was lining up on both sides of the line of scrimmage more than he had done previously in his career as well. And they were doing different things with spies, with linebackers. Sometimes it was like Larry Ogunjobi who served a spy role. Sometimes it was a safety, different players blitzing from different places, just engaging with blocks to open up defensive linemen to be the free runners. There were so many new wrinkles. And that was the difference between previous iterations of the Lamar Jackson game plan they'd had before.
Yes. And, you quoted Trey Hendrickson in your article. It's the brilliance of Lou. Trey Hendrickson said, he's scheming things up and it's our job to execute it. So when guys step up and make plays, that's what we want. Defensive players, especially guys who have a high motor like Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard, they want the game in their hands. They want the defensive coordinators to say, yeah, we're going to try something a little different. You're going to have to play a little different from a different position or a different angle on the field, but go get them. And that's what I thought Anarumo did a terrific job of on Sunday. He really empowered that defense.
Yeah. Like the responsibilities that he gave them, the trust that he gave them, even down to Akeem Davis-Gaither, who probably did more things. Like, if you know what I'm saying, he
had more responsibility. It looked like when he was on the field, I thought he did a reasonably good job of setting the edge. And that's usually something, obviously, you expect the defensive ends to do. But when you're, sending the rushers upfield very aggressively, certainly with regard to Trey Hendrickson, you have to have somebody behind him or you're screwed in the run. If he cuts up field, you have nobody there. And that's one of the reasons I think the 3 linebacker system works so much, is that when the 3 linebackers were on the field, there was more of an aggressive up the field attack against Lamar.
And the point I was making, though, like the trust that they put in Akeem Davis-Gaither, a bench player for them. He did everything from set the edge, as you say, to his kind of primary job was to cut off the first down line, since he had that vertical head start and be in the position to force someone to change directions or make the tackle himself. He did everything from that to guarding Mark Andrews. Those are 2 very different responsibilities, and those are 2 crucial responsibilities against the Ravens. And the person who was asked to do that was the person who had played the least for the Bengals this season. And just everyone on the defense was trusted to win their one-on-one matchups, and the defensive players rewarded that faith that the scheme put in them.
How did you think Trey Flowers did against Mark Andrews? I thought in the second half, there were times where he was assigned to him and Akeem Davis-Gaither was not. And I thought Trey Flowers, you speak of Akeem not having that much experience this year, not having that many snaps, which is certainly true. He had more snaps on the field than Trey Flowers did as a Cincinnati Bengal, as Sunday was his first game, obviously, since being acquired from the Seahawks. How do you think he did?
That's the moment I'd love to hear that idea get tossed out on like Tuesday. Some random defensive assistant goes, I got it. We put Trey Flowers on Mark Andrews. And I'd love to hear the reaction and then how that game plan unfolded. Like, it turns out that Flowers has a long track record of going up against Andrews as far back as college. And then when Flowers was in Seattle, I just went back and did some research kind of on Monday, curious, like they had a pretty long track record of Flowers winning those matchups. And it was one of like 4 different looks they gave at him. There was a lot of Davis-Gaither. Sometimes it was Von Bell or Jesse Bates in one-on-one with Andrews. They consistently gave them different looks. But yes, one of them was a player who literally had never played for the Bengals and didn't give up a single mistake in his first game with the team.
Yeah, and you also bring up the fact, Charlie, that on third down, Anarumo put 7 players at the line of scrimmage. He blitzed all 7 players, including safety. I think I remember this, Ricardo Allen and Von Bell. I mean, you don't see that very, very often, but it was almost a throwback, I thought, to the Mike Zimmer, Paul Gunther days, where you had guys blitzing from different spots on the field. And it really, in the days that those blitz packages from Zimmer and Gunther were really effective, they were unpredictable. And that's the unpredictability I think you saw on Sunday.
There are different wrinkles to every third down scheme, but it gave me flashbacks to Ravens versus Bengals at M&T Bank Stadium in 2020. It had a little Ravens defense blitz kind of vibe to it, with the number of players who were at the line of scrimmage, the types of players, safeties, linebackers, slot corners at the line of scrimmage, presenting either a bluff, forcing the Ravens to account for the possibility that they could rush, but then on 2 huge plays in the fourth quarter, they actually sent everyone twice, back to back. And the combination of those 2 things, as I mentioned, just kept Lamar on his back foot. It was something I don't remember seeing from the Bengals. That type of deployment as close to the line of scrimmage with so many different players. It's something that teams have done against the Bengals more than the opposite. And they saved it for the Ravens. And it worked for the first time.
All right. Speaking with Charlie G, follow him on Charlie Goldsmith. Speaking with Charlie Goldsmith, I'll call you by your official name, of the Cincinnati Enquirer covering the Bengals. On Twitter, you can follow him at Charlie G _. There, I got it right. Anyway, what impressed you more, Charlie, on Sunday? Holding Lamar to 17 points on his home turf, knowing that Lamar came into that game as certainly, along with Kyler Murray, a leading candidate in the early MVP race, or dropping 41 on that defense that was top 5 or 10 in most categories, and you did it on the road. What impressed you more?
I'll say, here's how I'll explain it. It's the second one, what the Bengals did, dropping 41 points. And I'll narrow it down to 2 plays, the 2 20-plus yard rushing touchdowns that Mixon had and Pirine had. Like what those 2 plays reminded me of, and no one made the same accusation this time, but After the Bengals beat Pittsburgh on the road, Tyler Boyd said, as we all remember, they made the Steelers quit. And
Right.
that really showed with how the Bengals continue to have success and run the ball and just burst through the Steelers defense in the end of the fourth quarter. This was, if you just look at the runs and how the Ravens defended it, this was even more glaring in how the Bengals were just the physical, dominant team. And the Ravens just weren't combating that at all in the fourth quarter. The Bengals couldn't run the ball in the first half. But in the second half, the edge, specifically the fourth quarters, they ran out the clock. The edge that the Bengals were playing with, the Ravens weren't even close to matching that. So the answer I'll say is the 41 points. And it's because it was such a decisive and, an edge the Bengals had that the Ravens didn't, and frankly, didn't even look like they were trying to match in the fourth quarter. That's the kind of intangible difference that winning teams have.
So I will tell you one thing that impressed me about, and I will go with the 41 points also, because I think Lou Anarumo has a terrific defense, and I think it was awesome that they stopped Lamar, but given the way the game plan was executed, I wasn't as surprised by that. I was shocked by the 41 points, namely the 416 yards of passing, again, on the road from Joe Burrow, and the 201 yards by Jamar Chase. And those two statistics alone kind of tell you the ability that the Bengals have to put up prolific offensive numbers, those numbers that we've been begging to see from the Bengals in the first 6 weeks, right? I mean, how many times have there been complaints voiced in that press box? When are we going to finally see this Bengals offense explode? And they really didn't again in the first half. They had 13 points at halftime, and they had 14 points in 3 other half times. But in that second half, the way they dominated offensively, and what really impressed me was the way they used CJ Uzomah. And I know Kelsey did a story on this, but CJ, I've been really wondering when the Bengals were finally going to start using a tight end like Uzomah when you've got 3 wide receivers that demand such attention. Uzomah's going to be open on single coverage constantly. I saw it in New England with Brady and Gronk. You've got the same type of situation setting up perfectly for this Bengals offense. And you've got a quarterback who can realize that and get the right matchup on the field. I think it's very exciting, and I think it's going to be very curious to see how Uzomah is used the rest of the year.
I think schematically, one of the biggest differences in the entire Bengals offense is the value and the premium they're placing on how they use their tight ends, specifically Uzomah. That deep ball to CJ, that was a play designed for him.
Right.
I'm curious how many plays in 2019 and 20 Taylor called designed for the tight ends ever, frankly, to be honest.
It just bugs me when really good receiving tight ends, and I think Uzomah is that, aren't employed.
Well, that's part of it too. I think like CJ had never been that throughout his entire career. He's having a great start to the season. He's getting pretty close to that point where he's going to already be setting career highs in like week 10, week 11, week 12. He's having such a different style of season with his productivity and his role than he has ever had. Partially it's a credit to him for taking a step forward. And then again, partially is a Bengals offense placing a premium on how they use tight ends. And like, how many times have we seen them go 13 personnel, Burrow play action, and throw the ball to one of their tight ends? I can think of 4 or 5 plays like that. The Bengals are incorporating their tight ends into their passing game plan more than they ever have. And a huge credit, a huge part of that belongs to Uzomah for being in the best position he's ever been in to be a dynamic receiving threat. And that's just, as you mentioned, open up more for the offense.
Well, and I'll tell you another thing it will do, Charlie, is it's going to open up the run game, because if you start spreading guys, I think you don't even have to go in 13. You can probably go in 11. And if Uzomah's on the field, maybe even 12, and you can get 2 other deep threats on the field on the outside, you've got the chance to do, the reverse play action, look like you're going to pass, and then, run Mixon off a draw, run Chris Evans, run P-Run. There's so many opportunities for this run game to really get started and start to dominate teams. And I think the way you really, like they did, exert their will and dominance in the fourth quarter by running the ball, That's what they need to do earlier in these games to kind of wear down defenses.
Oh, completely. You've seen several first halves. One of the big issues has been the inability to run the ball.
Yes.
And the counter for that, though, is how effective they've been in the second half specifically. Like the run game kind of shifts when the Bengals have the lead and how they try to use it. Mixon for like it's hard to really prove it, but I just think that Mixon's a better football player when the Bengals have the lead. And I think that stylistically you can do more.
He's a closer. He
exactly.
is definitely a closer.
You can do more with him when you're running out the clock. And he's that type of physical back who, when you don't need the 20-yard play, is able to get the 5 when you're up a score or two. Like,
yep.
I can't remember a time where he didn't virtually get the save. Like you saw for the first time with this Bengals coaching staff when they beat the Browns in 2019 to end the season. That was a Joe Mixon game, a Joe Mixon statement game. Then last year when they beat the Jaguars, the one win they had when Mixon played, not Mixon's fault. Let me add. Mixon was the closer against the Jaguars and had an incredible game running out that clock. And blowout games this season, I mean, the one you'd look to is Detroit, how great Mixon played in the second half. Then on Sunday, how well Mixon did in the fourth quarter to make the final runs to chew the clock and seal the game. Every time, and then just to go back this year as well, Pittsburgh, he had a productive game and they did the same thing. Like every time the Bengals have needed that with this coaching staff, Mixon has provided. And frankly, I don't think he gets enough credit for that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the closer reference and getting the save. I know your baseball background is coming into play here, and you do terrific work covering the Reds. You miss covering the Reds, by the way, now that their season is over?
Every season has its strengths. So I love covering football now. And then in February, I'll be ready to go to Goodyear.
Yeah, I'm sure you will be. Going back to Joe Mixon, he only carried the ball, Charlie, 12 times. P. Ryan had 11 on Sunday. And that surprises me a little. I mean, but that is part of the element of when you throw the ball around the field like the Bengals did on Sunday and get some big plays. You don't have to. You can run the ball to kill the clock. And that's essentially what the Bengals did on Sunday.
Yeah, they're great running the ball to kill the clock. And if we're talking about weaknesses of the offense, they're bad in most other situations. I mean, there might have been 2 or 3 third and short runs that the Bengals attempted.
I'm glad you brought that up. Okay.
And then they just abandoned it. So,
well, they are going to have to eventually find a way to convert second and short, third and short. So there was a Mixon, there was a Mixon 9-yard run. It set up 2nd and 1. They run the ball into the line, nothing. They sneak, and you called it, and I was going to scream it out in the press box just as you were saying the dive play when you yelled that out. You remember this?
Now, of course, it was
right. And you're like, this is that with it was it P. Ryan in front of Mixon?
Yeah. And I could do a whole podcast on this play.
Please. The stage is yours. Go.
So the reason I knew it was the dive play is because I'd watched it so many times from the Colts game last year, because it was the last play Mixon was on the field for in the entire 2020 season. And for all of Mixon's strengths, he just has I remember he had different posture on the play. Also, I remembered that they went into a heavy personnel with multiple tight ends close to the line of scrimmage and without their best receiving threats on the field. And then, of course, they put P. Ryan at fullback, which is the exact same thing they did against the Colts last year. That play, when they handed it to P. Ryan in Indianapolis, was an epic failure and the reason they lost the game. And then this season, I go, this rings a bell. And it was the exact same play. Mixon had the same posture. P. Ryan had the same stance, the same personnel. And it didn't work last time, and it didn't work this time either.
So that Indianapolis game, that was the game they went up, 21-0, right?
Yep.
And 24-14 and couldn't hold on to the lead because they couldn't run the ball. They could, I'm glad you brought that up, Charlie, because in that game, they could not do the things that they're doing this year. When they get the lead, they were not a good front running team. And obviously toward the end of this, they didn't have Burrow. They didn't have Mixon. I understand all of that. They didn't have Jamar. We all understand that. But they are doing things this year when they play with the lead that is much different than the 2020 and obviously the 2019 Bengals.
I think they're even better at passing when they have the lead too. I think that's an area where CJ Uzama comes into play. I think that, again, this isn't a stat I've checked, but I would bet you that for all the talk we've had about Tyler Boyd and what his role is, when the Bengals are up a touchdown or more, I would bet Tyler Boyd's
targets
and his targets are through the roof compared to where they are.
I get that same sense.
That, like, again, when I go back play by play of when Boyd's been used, it's when, like, it's after guys like Chase and Uzama and Higgins have broken the dam almost and given the Bengals the lead. Then, based on the counter reaction by the defense, like, there was a play, Boyd was more wide open on that pass in the third quarter than any Bengals receiver was in the history of the franchise. He's had a few of those moments this season where when the Bengals get the lead, Boyd gets more involved. So they're a lot better in a lot of areas, and that's one of them.
All right, we're going to move on to the New York Jets. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is a game the Bengals have to win. I mean, they've had a couple of them. We thought that the game against the Jaguars had to be a win. And barely was. Game against the Lions had to be a win. And in the second half, it certainly was. They were clearly, I mean, Detroit had no business being on the field with them. And that was a very good sign for the Bengals at the start of this current 3-game road trip. This game against the Jets just got train wrecked 54-13 by the Patriots. There's no Zach Wilson. He's out with a PCL injury. And probably no CJ Mosley, their best defensive player, the most consistent and biggest playmaker. This has to be a win in New York, right, Sunday? There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that.
As much as, like, as I started off this podcast, the Ravens game was probably the hardest possible game you could drop to pick the Bengals to win. And of course they won it. Like, this Jets game is the easiest possible game you could drop to pick the Bengals to win with the Jets' limitations at quarterback. Like, the Jets are worse at running the ball on third and short, just from the eye test, me watching them, than the Bengals are. That's a real testament to how much the Jets offensive line and their run game up the middle is struggling. They have some speed in offense, but they don't have much else. And I was very unimpressed with Mike White. And then the defense as well. I mean, look at the screens, the yards after catch, and then the deep balls that an unexplosive Patriots offense was able to create. I mean, at every single level, the Bengals have
so bad. I mean, I just can't see a way where if the Bengals just go in, take care of business, don't get injured, all of that, they don't come out of New York with a win and a solid win. Like, I'm talking 10, 14, 17 points. I mean, this is a game where the rosters are not competitive. They're not. And I've talked about that a lot this year on the podcast, that the Bengals are starting to play to their roster and the strengths of their roster. The Jets, I mean, Elijah Vera Tucker is probably one of their better draft picks. He's going to be a very good interior lineman for them. He's somebody to keep an eye on. Watch him. He's number 75, the left guard for the Jets this coming week. But they don't have a lot of other weapons on the field at all to speak of. I mean, they have Jamison Crowder. They have Corey Davis. They've got a couple of veterans on the edges on the perimeter of the wide receiving game, but not much else to consider in this game.
So this is a very deep cut. They remind me a lot of the Butch Jones Bengals, or excuse me, the Butch Jones Bearcats.
Oh, whoa. Okay.
2014 era. And here's why, I watched a game yesterday. Basically they have 4 plays, and that was always the thing of the Butch Jones offense.
Yes,
they have the out route to Corey Davis. The the Bearcats always had that one physical outside wide receiver. Mike White would throw corner, out route passes to Corey Davis. That was, they scored their first touchdown. Did it a couple times, but White doesn't necessarily have the arm strength to make that a consistent play in the offense. They have the outside run. Michael Carter, their running back, a rookie, is fast, but their offensive line isn't getting pushed consistently at all, and he's not advanced enough in his reads to make that a consistent play. They have a slot fade, which the Bearcats would always run for Woods. I forget his first name, but Woods, you could live
Elijah Woods?
Different Woods. No, I played for the Bearcats.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong. Never mind.
Yeah, they would just Zach Claris would just throw it up to him 10 times a game. And as I mentioned, Mike White doesn't have the arm strength to make that a consistent play. He was sailing balls into the sideline. it was not a consistent play at all for the Jets yesterday. And then their fourth play that they actually ran it for a touchdown, a very nice like reverse to Elijah Moore. I really like Elijah Moore. Very fast. He's not catching the ball consistently yet. But that was the one good touchdown I saw where Moore came like some pre-snap motion, caught the ball instead of the running back on the handoff, and then took it around the other corner, around the right tackle for a touchdown into the end zone. Some very nice running ability from a wide receiver there. But as Bearcats fans know with the Butch Jones offense, those 4 plays don't make a great offense. And that's especially true when you have a quarterback in Mike White, who just based on my evaluation has like his passes have very little arc. And also his pocket awareness was a huge issue. A number of balls deflected and a number of plays where like when the first pressure came, play was over and he would just run and throw the ball away or get rid of it, throw the ball into the line of scrimmage, stuff like that. So it'll be an easier Jets offense to scheme against than most teams.
Yeah, and I think they'll be ready. You're going to hear a lot this week. We just got to keep our nose to the grindstone, do our job, keep focused on the task at hand, not think ahead, because the week after this they come home and face the Browns. And I hate the expression trap game, but really it's a trap game. It's on the road, but it is a trap game as the Bengals have a game which is going to turn into be a huge game against the Cleveland Browns at PBS the week after this Jets game, and then they go into their bye. So what else you working on, Charlie? What's up? And did you were on the flight back with me from Baltimore? That was an experience.
If that's as bad as it gets, I'm willing to live with. It was like 2-3 hour delay, and it was a very nice airport, lots of food options, short lines.
Agreed.
So I made the most of the day and got some work done, and I made it back, which is all that matters.
Yeah, but how are you with turbulence? I'm not good. I am the first one to tell you I'm like a 3-year-old baby boy when the plane starts rocking and swinging back and forth.
I was locked into the book I was reading, no distractions and the middle seat in row 20 or whatever from me and my row. But I know what you're saying. I can live with turbulence. I was fine.
Yeah, and fortunately, there was no dropping of the airplane. Like
correct.
The airplane.
That's key. That is key.
That is key. I've been on a couple of those, and those are a whole different story altogether. We had some wind, we had some delays, but we got back safe and sound. Thank you, Southwest. Thank you, the wonderful pilots of Southwest, for getting us back on the ground safely after some turbulent air. Well, the Bengals are not experiencing any turbulence right now. They take on the Jets. Get it? See these metaphors I'm making concerning air travel? With the Bengals playing the Jets, Charlie?
That's like in 20 years, I hope my transitions are this good. Like that is a veteran radio and podcasting move right there. I'm very impressed.
Thank you very much, Charlie. I hope I am breathing in 20 years, but that's another podcast for another day. I want to thank Charlie Goldsmith for joining me on this edition of the Jungle Roar. It was a blast. You can download this podcast everywhere you download and listen to your favorite podcasts, including Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify. For Charlie Goldsmith of the Cincinnati Enquirer, I'm Mike Petraglia, and this has been the Jungle Roar podcast.